Well, I want to start with a question. In a nonprofit, how does one create sustainable, scalable donor relationship management, especially when resources are really limited in the nonprofit world? Well, today we're going to talk about that with my guest. My name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and this is Funding Your Future Now podcast. It's designed for people in the nonprofit world, whether they be leaders as a president or perhaps they are in fundraising themselves, any kind of role that may be. And this is designed to be practical insights as to what you can apply in your daily life in your nonprofit work. Well, today it's my delight to have as a guest Scott Swayne. And Scott brings with him quite a diverse background in the corporate and also in the nonprofit world. And so it's my delight to welcome him. So, Scott, so glad you can be here. And why don't you just share a little bit about yourself with the audience?
You bet. And Randy, once again, thank you for having me on your podcast today. I was really looking forward to our conversation.
Right.
So just in terms of background, I have spent my entire career doing what I believe to be my life's work, and that's working in human resources. And so I've done that for 35 years. One of the great things about human resources is that it's industry and organizational agnostic because there's people everywhere. And so that's given me a chance to, in the marketplace, work in the pharmaceutical and diagnostics industries. It's allowed me to work in robotics, in CPG, in seasoning and spices, and then finally in the fast casual restaurant industry.
All right.
However, I also had the opportunity to go from a career journey to a kingdom calling, and have had the chance to work in the Christian nonprofit space in my current role as Director of People and Strategy in one of the local churches.
Wonderful. Well, you've got an interesting background behind you. It looks as though it's some baseball memorabilia. Tell us a little bit about that. Love to hear your story.
You bet, Randy. Well, I grew up in Illinois. I married my high school sweetheart, and I've relocated 6 times in my career, if you can imagine that.
Okay.
So each of our 4 kids have been born in different states.
All right.
But growing up in Illinois, where I was from, the Quad Cities area, you had a choice between being a Cubs fan or a Cardinals fan.
Oh.
And I chose the Cubs, which for many years I worried that I made the wrong choice, but we finally won the World Series. So I think they say that Cubs fans are 99% scar tissue.
Okay.
Every year we think it's our year. And finally in 2016, that year came. And so this room that I'm speaking in right now is what I call my baseball den. And it's not dedicated just to the Cubs, but it's dedicated to the era of baseball that's my favorite, and that's the 1960s. And so that's why you see some of those things in the background, autographed baseballs, some of my childhood baseball cards. It even includes the baseball from my very first home run that I hit as a child that my dad collected, signed it, and just wrote the date. And it's just something I really cherish from my childhood.
That's really special. What a delight. Well, I'm going to jump into a few questions with you, and this is based upon things I've gotten to know about you. First one has to do with the relationship between a nonprofit leader and the board of that nonprofit. And that's obviously a very critical role. Given your what we would call woo, winning others over personality, and it's obviously a strength, and your high interpersonal relationship scores, how do you recommend nonprofit leaders cultivate what we could call is authentic connections with board members? In other words, that go beyond simply a transactional fundraising asks, but turning those board members into champions who then can promote the mission. What does that relationship look like?
You bet, Randy. I think I'll start by just defining what the acronym WOO stands for.
Yeah.
It comes from Clifton Strength Finders, which is probably an assessment that many of your listeners are familiar with and have maybe taken. One of my top 5s is being a WOO, which means winning others over. And people that are WOO tend to excel at building relationships and connecting with others. So this strength typically shows up as somebody that's outgoing. They enjoy meeting new people and forming what I would say are authentic relationships versus transactional ones. So for an example, recently I just reconnected with somebody that I hadn't seen in 35 years. You can imagine that. And one of the things that I've enjoyed over time is just investing and staying current with that network. And it's something that we struggle with, isn't it? Sometimes we don't spend the time, take the time to invest in our training and development, being a lifelong learner. I find that to be true with networking as well,
Okay.
that sometimes it's hard to find time in the day. But it
Sure.
doesn't take long. You can just take a moment on LinkedIn and reach out and congratulate somebody on their
Mhm.
latest promotion or the new opportunity. You can invite them for a cup of coffee, maybe have lunch together, so that the next time you talk to somebody, it's not just transactional about,
You
can you do this for me? But you've
Yeah.
had this ongoing cultivation of that relationship over time.
So important. So as a leader works with the board, and he wants to instill in his board sort of that spirit that of winning others over. So it's not so the board members, they're people that are promoting the organization all the time. At least that's one of their responsibilities. And so you want to have that balance where the leader can help the board members in that role of obtaining funds or obtaining relationships, but he also wants to guide them. So the fact that he is a person or she is a person of influencing positively others, any tips or guidance as to how a president could help people on the board do the same thing?
Yeah. Well, one of the related strengths, there's 35 strengths on Strength Finders, and one of the related strengths is being a relator. So you've got the woo, who tends to be the person when they walk into the elevator that is
Yeah,
making eye contact with
sure,
everybody and maybe even, saying hello or connecting with them, whether they want that or not. They can't help themselves.
sure.
But the relator is somebody that enjoys deep relationship and close
Mhm.
connection that's really genuine over time. And so the characteristics that I think can come back to those board relationships are, finding people that are relators who enjoy close connection. When you have that, you tend to be vulnerable with each other. You have a
Mhm.
preference for the familiarity. You tend to focus on building trust and,
Mhm. Yeah,
transparency. And there is a pitfall, though, and that's sometimes you can focus too much on that close circle, and you can struggle with feelings of disappointment if others don't reciprocate that level of commitment.
for
So
sure.
one of the things that I'd recommend for boards is to consider having somebody come in to facilitate the assessment of the strength finders. And
Mhm.
when somebody does that, that allows each of the board members to complete the assessment, to
Okay.
submit their top five, and
Yeah.
then that can be placed on a composite that can be discussed strategically as a team, so that when you look at the four domains, you can look at that and say, okay, if relationship building, executing, strategic thinking, and influencing are in those domains, when we plot those top five, where are our strengths as a team?
Oh, sure.
And maybe where's the gap, and how can we work on that gap, or how can we compensate for each other so that we can be as effective and, as possible?
I love that. And as you were talking, it just reminded me that it would really be great if the president of the nonprofit took a board member with him or with her on a visit and actually was meeting a donor. And so, in essence, the president is coaching, mentoring that board member on how he or she interacts in hopefully a very personable way. I love your suggestion about plotting and seeing where each person lies and then being able to identify the best strengths that a board member could use in the nonprofit. Well, let's think about developing a culture in a nonprofit. You mentioned understanding, and as you put it, the connection between business and talent strategy across multiple industries. How would you advise a fundraising executive to build a development team culture that balances achieving aggressive revenue targets? So that's always out there, but balancing it with positive and empathy, because you want to keep the team engaged long term.
Yes.
And I think sometimes the challenge is we've got these massive goals and go get them. But maybe the team begins to suffer simply because the goals are so high. So that balance, how would you suggest an executive leader do that?
When I think about the connection between a business or an organization and their talent strategy, I think it starts by really aligning the two and ensuring that the organization effectively has organizational objectives, so that as you think about your contribution to that organization, you can see how your individual goals align with the department goals, how the department goals align to the organizational goals. And many times that starts with just creating a compelling vision.
Mm,
and then having a mission that helps you to accomplish that vision, and then maybe even defining the leadership behaviors and expectations that you expect as the leader. And then you share those with your peers and you ask your peers to hold you and your department accountable for achieving those. And if we're not, inviting feedback,
yeah.
because we don't always get it right. And so having a chance to pivot and to get back to our core, I think is a really important thing that I've seen. I also find that explaining the why is something that we overlook as leaders sometimes.
Oh, yes.
And, if you can't answer the question, why are we doing that? Then that's probably ripe for continuous improvement or to think about doing it differently. You may be familiar with that famous story about preparing a pot roast. And the daughter is preparing that and she chops off the end of the pot roast before
Mhm.
placing it in the pan, in the cooker. And one day she asked her mom, why do we do that? And the mom said, well, that's because that's the way my mom taught me to do that. And they
Oh,
realized that went all the way back to the great grandma. And so the
mm,
daughter asked the great grandma, why do we do that? And that was when the answer was discovered. And it was because the pot wasn't large enough to fit
oh,
the entire roast. And that's
sure.
why we cut off the end of it so it would fit into the pot. And so because the why wasn't passed down from generation to
Mhm.
generation, the behavior continued. Even though once the behavior was understood, they realized, you know what, our pot was big enough. We don't need to cut off the end anymore. And so I think as leaders to remind that we should lead with the why. And when we can't answer that question, that once again, we go back and we look at what we're doing and consider, should we keep doing that or should we do it differently?
That's so insightful. That's also just so practical to know your why. Simon Sinek talks about it. One of his
Yes.
podcasts or talks that he gives is your why. And I think every development person, we're all at different stages. Some are younger, some are more experienced, but to keep coming back to that core understanding, why am I doing this? And even when the pressure is a little higher, to really solidify the why even more, to understand that clarity, I think gives great perspective. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Randy, all of that drives employee engagement.
Yes.
And the more engaged a staff member is, of course, it's more likely that you're going to have improved performance and stronger organizational culture. And that can be measured through, staff culture surveys. Maybe sometimes they're called staff climate surveys. I
Mm,
recommend doing those every other year versus
okay.
every year. And
Sure.
the reason being is that, it's a gift that somebody takes the time to provide that feedback through a confidential and private survey. So by the time you go back and you've established your baseline, you want to check how much progress have we made against that?
Yeah.
Sometimes 1 year isn't enough time to make significant progress on that that's measurable. And so doing it every other year and then having very invitational opportunity for those same staff members to contribute and be part of the solution,
Mhm.
I've found is a best practice. And I would also add that the data alone isn't enough. So many times as leaders, we will want to put a dashboard together, maybe even color code that red, yellow, green, based on how we're doing against our priorities. I think the challenge for the very best leaders is not to just focus on the data, but to take the data and create insights with that. Because I think the insights are the things that really help us to identify the trends and the behaviors so that organizations can then tailor their services to meet the needs more effectively.
So insightful. If we don't know what the needs are or the desires and ambitions of our constituents, then we're really going to lose them out of the gate. And so that was, just appreciated that comment. And as you were talking, this whole role of, the high goals and keeping people motivated, I think sometimes just for a leader to walk around and let people know, I appreciate you. Thank you for what you did on that particular project. And this really means a lot to me. And, those conversations are sort of like management by walking around.
Yeah.
They don't need to be long, but boy, they really resonate so much with people. And that ties into your comment about ownership. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
I
Well,
think, Randy, it's probably important that we don't shy away from standards and that accountability, isn't a bad thing. That can be a good thing. And I know when I step into new leadership roles, I tend to sit my new team down and I usually say something to the effect of, I'm going to expect a lot out of each of you. And I don't say that to somehow scare you or intimidate you. And I'll never expect more out of you than I expect out of myself. But I think it's important that I'm candid with you from the beginning. But it's not just that I'm going to have expectations of you. I want you to have expectations of me as
Okay.
the new leader. And I want you to expect three things. Number one, I want you to expect that you'll be led in a way that creates impact and superior results. And
Mm.
why is that important? Because that's what our reputation is built on. And the stronger our reputation is, more likely the more things that people will ask us to do that maybe expand beyond our initial scope as a department. The second thing I want you to feel is that you're uniquely known and cared for by me as a leader. And why is that important? Because people tend to leave managers more than they leave organizations. And
That's
so I want people to feel like they're uniquely known and cared for, not in a creepy way that we're going out after
good.
work, every night, but
Yeah.
that people may know things about me as a part of my staff that maybe other people don't know. And they may choose to share things about themselves in that way. Because if the people working in my organization are really talented, which many times they are, other people will see that too. So when they get approached for that next opportunity, my hope is that they come back and they say, I'm working for somebody that really cares for me. And I can't assume that that would be the case in the next place I go. And then the third thing is I want them to feel like they're continuously developed,
Mm.
regardless of what stage in their career they are. And that maybe the biggest role that I play at the end of the year is just reminding somebody how much they've grown. So those are the three things: that you'll be led in a way that achieves impact and continuous results, that you will be uniquely known and cared for by me, and that you will be continuously developed.
Well, I'd like to work underneath you.
You're hired, Randy.
Oh, yeah, those are exceptionally good traits that as leaders apply them, that develops a strong culture.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to the next question. And you have a background in what we could say is operational excellence, but you also know how to bring structure into place. So, what systems or processes have you found most effective? What we'll call creating sustainable, scalable donor relationship management, especially when resources are limited. So, the process that you say this will help create that sustainable relationship.
Well, when I think about operational excellence in donor stewardship, I think that involves a combination of a number of things. That includes culture, it includes practices, and it includes processes. And all of those things are built with intentionality. I think a donor engagement plan would have a full donor cycle that includes both the cultivation prior
Mhm.
to the gift as well as the stewardship after the gift. So that takes us back to that idea of authentic relationship and connection. And one of the things that I've found as a tool that I like to use, I learned this during my time at McCormick and Company, and that was this idea of a 4-box bio. Because, sometimes our resumes or even our bios are a lot of words, and the 4-box bio is more pictorial and it's flexible. You can put whatever you want in each of the boxes, but I tend to, in the upper left-hand corner, start with what I believe is the most important thing for my core, and that's my family. And
Yeah.
and photos and pictures and,
Mm.
what do I stand for as a husband, as a dad, as a person of faith, as a leader in the community. I really want to define those things. And sometimes it's a great experience just to, reduce that to paper so that
Yeah.
you're clear about what you stand on.
For
And
sure.
then on the upper right-hand part of the box, I tend to put things that are fun facts, about
Mhm.
me. How
Okay.
many countries have I traveled to? What are all the pets that we had growing up? And
Sure.
somebody can look at that and say, oh, we had a chinchilla growing up too, or we've had a
Okay.
cockatiel in our home.
Yeah. All right.
The lower area is the values and passions and competencies that I have. And then finally on the lower left is the work experiences that I've had. And so I like to send that to people in advance. And I especially like that when I start new roles as part of the onboarding process.
Yeah.
Because then when I meet with them, I don't have to spend so much time talking about me.
Sure.
They've already made connections and maybe they can say, you know what, I'm a Cubs fan too. And then we can start there and I can learn about them and listen instead of just be me talking the whole time.
Yeah. That's so good. That was rich. I love the quadrants. It gives people an opportunity to naturally interact more with one another and build that great team dynamic that is so essential in nonprofit.
Randy, if I could add one other thing to that, I think
Yeah.
operational excellence connects to continuous improvement as well. And one of the things that I've learned by working for organizations, because, I've gone from a career journey to a kingdom calling now, working for a Christian nonprofit. And so in my marketplace experience, I've had the exposure to things like TPM, total productive manufacturing, which came out of the Toyota system, or the
Mhm.
General Electric has used. And one of the tools that I've seen work successfully in both profit and nonprofit to help with continuous improvement is what I would call the why analysis. And so what you do is you take the problem that you're struggling with, you define that, and then you get in the room with other people that are impacted by that, and you say, now, why is that happening?
Mm.
And then you write that down, and then you take the next layer and you say, well, then why is that happening?
Okay.
And as you continue to peel that down, maybe 4 or 5 levels, you hopefully get to the root of the problem and the root cause. And then that allows you to apply, what's a better way we can do that? How do we
Mm.
dream about this together to achieve continuous improvement?
Yeah.
So applying those tools, I think, can be effective in any organization that you're in.
Absolutely. So good. Thank you. Well, nonprofits can experience revenue shortfalls, maybe a lot of time. So your high stress tolerance and optimism scores are really outstanding as I was more aware of them. So let's talk about a nonprofit president and they're facing a major funding shortfall. Or maybe the campaign just has not worked out, or what specific strategies would you recommend to maintain, in this case, team morale and donor confidence while pivoting the strategy? So it's not work, we got to change. What would you say can maintain morale and donor confidence during that time of change?
Sure. Well, I think we should just start by acknowledging that nonprofits are really navigating a very challenging fundraising and giving environment right now. It's characterized by uncertainty and
Yeah.
really the need for strategic approaches.
Mm.
And when I think about uncertainty, the first thing that comes to mind is the acronym VUCA. And once again, many of your listeners may be familiar with this, but it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And isn't that the world that we live in today? It's
Absolutely.
and I think that that requires really defining and inspiring vision, because when people are inspired by the vision, I think that connects to their own personal mission, and
Mm.
they're maybe more willing to give under circumstances like that. I think I would add to that by saying data-driven decision making. We talked about that already, about utilizing data, but also insights that would inform choices and help you to understand what's working, maybe what's not working. I'd also add to that financial agility. So
Mhm.
diversifying revenue streams and maybe even building a cash reserve for unexpected changes. And then I'd close with just transparency. We live in such a transparency culture right now. The things that this generation expect to know are very different maybe than it was like when I started my working career. And so I think maintaining clear and consistent communication with both your staff as well as stakeholders, even when outcomes are uncertain. Because this VUCA world, I think it's created, at least for me, the most challenging part of my leadership journey in my career
Sure.
so far. And maybe others would feel the same way.
Sure. Absolutely. Very unexpected environment. Things can change on a dime. And to be able to know how to handle, to be a person that can they can feel comfortable with the unexpected. And I think that builds confidence in the team, even if the leader doesn't know all the answers or all the processes that need to be done. That can evolve, especially as the team works together. But to say, hey, we're going to work this out. We're going to find a solution and we're going to find it together. I know. So that's so good. Well, I've got a few personal questions just about you as an individual at the end. And first one is this: what would you say is the best or a great piece of professional advice that you've received in your past?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that I've received a lot of great advice, personally and professionally. I think as leaders, we don't just wake up someday and have it all figured out. In fact, we probably never have it all figured out.
Mm.
But what we do know in balancing confidence with humility, because people want to follow people that are confident in what they're doing. And if you look over your shoulder and there's nobody back there, you have to ask yourself, are you really leading? But when I think about, the ingredients to success in leadership, I think it starts by just acknowledging that there's many, many people that have poured into that in our lives over time. We can maybe go back to our families, maybe our early teachers, maybe our
Mhm.
coaches, maybe people that, invested in us as mentors or
Right.
sponsors, in the workplace. And so there's a whole list of people when you take the time to really think of that. And I think sometimes where we come up short on that is not acknowledging that it wasn't just us that figured this out and glorifying God for the role that he played in that process. And I would just encourage people, if you haven't recently reached out to those people that have made an impact and have taught you over
Mhm.
time, to put urgency on that. Do that today.
Yeah.
Reach out to one of those people and just thank them for the important role that they have played, because there's a lot of people that have contributed to our success over time, and we haven't been able to just figure it out on our own.
So insightful. Next question is, what's one daily habit you cannot live without?
Well, for me, it's a daily devotional and opening in prayer. I'm a survivor of a brain tumor,
Oh,
and
my.
I went on a business trip and I didn't come back, and I've taken a lot of business trips, but on this particular one, I was going to Columbus, Ohio to facilitate a 3-day strategic planning meeting with the executive leader of the organization I was working for. And while I was there, I started to experience unexpected pain and pressure in my brain. I went to the emergency room and they discovered that I had a non-cancerous brain tumor called a colloid cyst. So
Mhm.
they rushed me into surgery. They flew my wife and my 4 kids out. And I didn't have just one, but I had 2 brain surgeries.
Mm.
Then I got a brain infection.
Oh,
And
my.
I was in the ICU so long that by the time I was released, I had lost so much muscle strength, I had to relearn how to walk in a
Wow.
rehabilitation center. And so it took months for me to get back home. And
Mm.
I think through that process, it was very humbling. It made me rethink, how I start each day.
Yeah.
And so my pastor taught me to start the day by saying, thank you, Lord, for life today. And then just saying, what would you like me to do? Where would you like me to go? What would you like me to say? Because it's just a great way to just center your day. And then you can add things to your prayer life after that. I love daily devotionals. It's a practice that was introduced to me many years ago. I'm currently doing the Tony Dungy devotional, which I find has got a great balance of scripture as well as leadership lessons that he had as a Super Bowl winning football coach. And I'll rotate that, with Sarah Young, Jesus Calling, and maybe Billy Graham's devotionals. But I find that that helps to just set my day as I go forward.
Yeah. Love it. Next question is, if you could go back and tell something to your 20-year-old self, what would you say?
Well, I would say, first of all, that, life is going to be filled with failure and disappointment.
Mhm.
And, we all face those things. And it sounds kind of provocative, but there's reality in that. And so I'll give you an example. My initial dream was to be a pediatrician. And so I'm kind of on my second career already working in human resources. But when I was preparing to be a pediatrician, I knew I needed to start with a pre-med curriculum. So I picked a school that was very well known for their pre-med curriculum, but it was a very difficult curriculum. And most people did not make it through it. But
Okay.
that's what attracted me to it, because I wanted to know right away, was I going to be able to get into the very best medical school? Would I be able to be, one of the best pediatricians or not? And so I started my freshman year in biology and chemistry, not just the courses, but also the labs. It was all based on the curve. And
Yeah.
I got through my first semester and I'd failed every biology exam,
Oh,
every
boy.
chemistry exam, and every lab in both of those areas. So I
Oh,
realized I had not discerned correctly, what I was supposed to do.
right.
It probably was I had a great biology teacher in high school, and that,
Right.
drew me to the sciences. So I came home at Christmas, and my parents were like, well, Scott, how's it going? And, I was like, well, it's not going so good. I'm on academic probation. I've been removed from my major, and now I need to pivot, which I did, into business administration. And through
Right.
internships and other experiences, I began to develop the skills that I later learned were human resources.
Right.
But my parents gave me such a gift in that, because they said, Well, Scott, we're sorry to hear that, but our question for you is, did you give your very best? And I said, I did. I gave my very best, and it just didn't work out. And I think in the end, I would have had really good bedside manner, but I wouldn't have been able to diagnose anything, which is a
Oh,
problem for returning patients,
yes,
so, but that was a gift that they gave to me by just saying, did you give your very best? And that's something I've tried to pass on to my kids as well. Whatever
excellent.
you're doing, give your very best and
Yeah,
then be satisfied with the outcome of that, even if it isn't what you expected.
for sure.
Yeah,
Well, this next question sort of dovetails into what you've just been talking about, but it has to do with a past failure. Doesn't need to be an epic situation, but instead of focusing on that, what did that experience? How did it set you up for success later in life? Share a little bit about that with us.
sure. That when that question, Randy, reminds me of a book that I read this year called Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. And, one of my takeaways from that was a reminder. I had lunch with Patrick Lencioni one time, and he
Okay.
said, you know, adult learners need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed. And,
Mhm.
I think we've learned so many things that sometimes we forget those things. And, the book Necessary Endings reminded me that we have to live our lives moving forward, but sometimes we can only understand those looking back. And I tend to be a fairness person. And so there's things in my life I look back and I think, well, that wasn't fair. Why did
Right.
that happen? But sometimes there has to be a necessary ending to reveal
Mhm.
the next great thing God has for us.
Yeah.
And so upon reflection, when I look back at those moments that maybe felt unfair, I then realize, well, this amazing thing happened next, and it couldn't have happened if there
Mhm.
hadn't been an ending somewhere
Right.
else. And so those are some of the things that, I try to bring forward as just reminders for myself and then to share with my kids when
Yeah.
they ask or when they're open to listening.
Yeah. Hopefully they do both.
That's what our hope is as parents, right?
Really. Last question. What's your favorite place on earth to disconnect and recharge?
Gosh. That tends to be with my family,
Yeah.
whether it's, quiet moments at home or whether it's a, vacation of seeing and learning new things together.
Mhm.
One of our traditions at our house is taking a senior trip with the kids when they graduate from high school. And we learned about that because we were invited with some of our friends on their oldest child's senior trip. And they took a Caribbean cruise. Now they didn't pay for our, our family of six to go on the cruise with them, but it was so wonderful to be invited into somebody else's moment like that. And what we realized is what they were celebrating was this accomplishment, that was so significant, all the hard work, that went into their
Right.
graduation. It was the investment that the parents had made
Yeah.
to encourage that child through that moment and also to celebrate what was next. And so, anyway, we thought so highly of that that we decided to implement that within
Yeah.
our family too. And so we asked the kids, as they approach graduation, where would you like to take your senior trip? Now, we've learned that we take the recommendation, for consideration, not
Right.
necessarily to
Yeah.
adopt it because
Yeah.
they've got big ideas
I'm
sometimes.
sure they do.
And so we've done that. We've made some great memories through that process, and
Nice.
we've had a chance to celebrate them. And then my wife and I have kind of quietly, not said it to them, but thought, you know what, we made it too,
Yeah.
because it takes a big investment as parents and it's not always easy. And it's been good affirmation for us as well.
So good. Rich experiences as a family. That's the ultimate. Well, Scott, what a delight to connect with you. You brought so many valuable insights into this role of how do we work as people together when you talk about human resources and understanding personality types and how to face stress and deal with change. So I'd just love for you to take some time right now and share with our audience ways that they could connect with you in the future. Yeah, well, thank you for your willingness to continue to build into the lives of other people. Well, as we conclude, my name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and this is Funding Your Future Now podcast. And we send these out regularly, invite you to take them in because we believe that they can be very practical insights for your world as leaders. So for now, that's all. We'll see you in the next one.